7 days, no Instagram, no TikTok, no Twitter, no scrolling, nothing. And I want to be honest with you. The first thing that happened wasn't clarity. It wasn't peace. It wasn't some beautiful awakening. The first thing that happened was panic. Not because something was wrong, but because nothing was demanding my attention. And my brain didn't know what to do with that. What I'm about to tell you are the things that nobody in these I quit social media videos ever actually says. The uncomfortable parts, the weird parts, the parts that will make you understand something about yourself that you probably don't want to know. Everyone talks about how good they felt after quitting, but they skip over day 1 and day 2. Here's what actually happens inside your brain in the first 48 hours. Social media platforms are engineered to exploit a neurological mechanism called the dopamine anticipation loop. Every time you open an app, your brain releases dopamine. Not because you found something rewarding, but because you might. The uncertainty is the addiction. When that loop is suddenly cut off, your brain doesn't relax. It goes looking for the loop. It sends out distress signals. That restlessness you feel? That compulsive urge to check your phone even when there's nothing to check? That is withdrawal. Mild, yes, but real. By hour 36, I had picked up my phone 14 times. I counted, and opened the app before remembering I'd deleted it. 14 times, automatic, unconscious. And that moment, catching yourself mid-reach, hand already moving before your brain even issued the command. That moment tells you everything. It tells you that what you thought was a choice was actually a reflex. Something trained into your muscle memory so deeply you stopped noticing it was happening. Think about that. Your body has learned to reach for stimulation the way it learned to reach for food when you're hungry. Except you're not hungry. You're just uncomfortable. And the phone became the answer to every discomfort, no matter how small. That's the first thing nobody tells you. You are more addicted than you think you are, and realizing that is not comfortable. By day 3, something shifted. The craving quieted down, and in that quiet, I heard something I hadn't heard in a long time. My own thoughts. Not the thoughts that were reactions to content. Not the opinions I formed because an algorithm decided what I should be outraged about today. My actual thoughts. And here's where it gets psychologically interesting. Research in cognitive science suggests that constant external stimulation interrupts a mental state called the default mode network. The mental space where your brain processes emotions, consolidates memories, imagines the future, and builds a coherent sense of self. We have been systematically robbing ourselves of this mental state. Every spare moment, waiting in line, eating lunch, lying in bed, we fill it with input. We have forgotten what it feels like to just exist. Here's a simple test. When was the last time you waited for something? A coffee, an elevator, a friend who was running late. Without pulling out your phone. Not because you needed it, just because the wait felt like wasted space that needed to be filled. We have been outsourcing our inner life to platforms that profit from our distraction. And the cost of that is not just time. The cost is a slow erosion of the ability to be alone with yourself without feeling anxious about it. By day 4, I sat for 20 minutes doing nothing. Not meditating, not planning, just sitting. And for the first time in years, I felt what I can only describe as mental spaciousness. But here's the dark side of that silence. Some of the thoughts that came up weren't pleasant. Feelings I had been scrolling over. Discomforts I had been numbing. Social media, it turns out, is not just entertainment. For a lot of us, it is emotional avoidance dressed up in a colorful interface. Day 5 brought something I didn't expect at all. I started to question who I actually was, separate from the version of myself I had been performing online. Social media encourages what psychologists call impression management, the constant, often unconscious process of curating how others perceive you. Even if you don't post often, you are still consuming other people's curated versions of themselves. And over time, this warps your internal benchmark. You start measuring your real life against everyone else's highlight reel. Without that input, something recalibrated. I stopped thinking about how things would look and started thinking about how things felt. I cooked a meal, not for a photo, just because I was hungry. I went for a walk, not to listen to a podcast, just to walk. These sound like small things, but they represent a fundamental shift in motivation, from external validation to internal experience. Psychologists call this intrinsic motivation, and the research is clear. Intrinsic motivation is consistently linked to greater well-being, deeper satisfaction, and more sustainable behavior change. The question that haunted me by day 5 was this: how much of what I want is actually mine? And how much of it was planted there by an algorithm? The last 2 days were quieter than I expected. Not dramatic, not euphoric, just cleaner. My mind felt less cluttered. I read more. I had longer conversations. I noticed details in my environment that I hadn't registered in months. But the most significant change was in my relationship with boredom. We have declared war on boredom. We treat it as a problem to be solved, a void to be filled. But boredom is not the absence of something good. Boredom is the brain's signal that it is ready to create, explore, and generate. If you let it. There is a reason so many artists, writers, and thinkers throughout history describe their best ideas as arriving in moments of stillness. Not while they were consuming, while they were doing nothing. The mind, when given space, doesn't go empty. It goes to work on the things that matter to you most. The problems you haven't solved. The questions you haven't finished asking. The ideas you started and then buried because another notification came through. By day 7, I was writing again. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. That creative impulse had been buried under layers of consumption. Here's what nobody tells you about quitting social media. The goal is not to feel better in 7 days. The goal is to remember what it feels like to be a person who has a relationship with their own mind. And once you feel that, even briefly, you cannot unfeel it. I'm not telling you to delete your apps forever. That's not the point. The point is this: if the idea of 7 days without social media makes you anxious, that anxiety is information. It is telling you something about the degree of control these platforms have over your attention, your mood, and your sense of self. You don't have to quit, but you owe it to yourself to ask the question, what would I find if I actually got quiet? Most people never ask it, not because they don't care, but because the answer might require something from them. A change, an honesty, an admission that the life they've been curating online doesn't quite match the life they're actually living. Because the most important things about who you are, your real values, your actual desires, your deepest creative impulses, they don't live in a feed. They live in the silence you keep running from. The unbecoming isn't about becoming less. It's about stripping away everything that was never really you. See you in the next one.